a summary from all the other conferences. And Joel Brown provided this to me. Thanks, Joel, for that. And we, in our committee, we looked this over and we agreed with all of these, and then we just added to this. And so we really didn't have anything to add on this slide. On this slide, some of the things they talked about was better integration of these ecological sites into NRCS. Let me go back a slide and just talk about these a little bit, because go back previous there. So they're talking about the edit and ecological site inventory. And they wanted to talk about coordinating with ecological site focused team efforts and committees and recommendations, establish dedicated edit staff, maintain edit and NASA's communication. And Joel is telling us that within weeks, edit and NASA's are going to shake hands. So we're looking forward to that taking place. Continue to improve edit tools, optimize ecological site description content and style for end users, integrate dynamic soil properties, resource concern list, and soil health indicators. An example of that would be the rangeland soil health indicator sheets. Use a multi-tiered approach of conservation assessment and planning across land uses, within land uses, and for each state. Continuing with edit recommendations, better integration of ecological sites into NRCS land resource hierarchy. Provide continuing interagency access support to edit. Further developments include establishing edit-specific working groups, groups with BLM, with the Forest Service, other agencies, states, universities, whatever partnerships we can make. Ensure data quality contributed to edit. Cross-reference data elements of NASA's ecological site descriptions with plot descriptions from BLM assessment, inventory and monitoring, AIM, Forest Service inventory and analysis, FIA, Forest Service terrestrial ecological unit inventory, TEUI, and other legacy data sets, state natural heritage programs. Develop a webinar, remote edit database training for NRCS and other partners. Then we go to the dynamic soil properties. So we have here to advance greater dynamic soil property data collection, adapt dynamic soil property data collection methods to meet level of sampling intensity. And if you've seen the bulletin that come out on doing dynamic soil property projects, there's 3 tiers of data that can be collected. There's a extensive, an intermediate, and an intensive tier. Develop a dynamic soil property data hub. Integrate dynamic soil properties along with soil health indicators into the edit state transition model. Advance dynamic soil properties to support conservation planning and land management. And then we added a couple here. To begin a national push to collect soil biological properties on ecological reference states and collect all the properties. Do full soil characterizations and collect the biology and document the reference state. And I kind of see this push kind of like maybe like rapid carbon, but not as intense, but just begin to focus on collecting baseline data. And then the next thing we added was develop a database in NASA's, which I think they're working on, to house the biological property data. I've got lots of data. Some's in my computer, some's at the shack, some's with other agencies. We've got data all over the place. But we need to have a central location where we can house this reference state data and these other ecological state data for individual soils, where everybody can look at them. And if they're all taken with the standards and methods that we have in place, they'll be comparable, and there'll be stuff that will start some synergy with this, and research and people looking at trends in the data. This slide didn't come out the best. Anyway, this was all stuff that was already from the other regions, but novel anthropic ecological sites. Continue to develop them and continue to describe these anthropic sites and develop standards for depicting analog states and absent states in edit and state transition model. Soil Ecosystem Dynamics Committee recommendations and actions. Collaborate with the Forest Service on local and landscape scale land classification hierarchies. Renew and update MOU between the NRCS and the Forest Service. At local scale, cross-reference data elements of NASA's ecological site descriptions and Forest Service terrestrial ecological unit inventory TEUI plot descriptions. This is something that Kyle talked about in his presentation, if you heard him talking about the 11-point district of the Mark Twain, Kyle Steele. Landscape scale, coordinate with the Forest Service development of map and mountainous Northeast area and the Northeast area in general. That come from another region. A National Soil Moisture Network, coordinate with the consortium of government agencies, universities, and other groups advancing a standardized National Soil Moisture Network. We heard several presentations in the last couple of days talking about soil moisture and hydrology and how important that is to modeling. And that's all we had from our committee. Do you have any questions?
Hey, Mark, this is Dave Hoover. So on that last one, on that National Soil Moisture Network, I've been at part of the day at a National Soil Moisture workshop meeting, and so how do you see this happening for coordinating with this? Is the recommendation that the North Central region of NCSS will coordinate and collaborate on a National Soil Moisture Network, but it's just kind of an agreement to make it happen? I guess just a question on that, since this is exactly what we're talking about at this other meeting.
Yes, so these recommendations we kind of agreed with, that they did come from the other region. So we was just saying, yes, we think that there ought to be some type of consortium or some type of a group that's actually working on this and advancing this soil moisture network and putting it somewhere where it can be used.
Okay, I mean, I can understand that. I always think about, where's this recommendation actually going to go, and how's that going to be turned into something more, or is it just showing that there is support from the North Central NCSS region? You understand what I'm saying? I mean,
yes. I wish I could give you a better answer to that.
I'll take it though. I mean, I will use this as that here 85 individuals got together in Columbia, Missouri, and showed their support for a collaborative effort for soil moisture network. Now, if you had a couple $100,000, that'd be something else. But this support is great.
Too, how the scan sites and stuff like that might work into this as a project you know, bringing them together and all the soil moisture data. Then a lot of states like Missouri have mesonet sites that also are collecting data. And then I know too in soil science division there's a new piece of equipment to collect soil moisture data that is solar, that runs off of a battery and transfers information cellular. So,
Yeah, they've got 20 some of those units working down in Texas right now.
in the past, we've got a lot of well logs in Missouri. That data goes to a computer in an MLRA office, and there it is. So we really have nowhere where we're actually housing and sharing data, kind of like the soil biological property data. We're not able to put it somewhere where everybody can see it.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that very informative report and the conversation with Dave Hoover. That was very good. I just wanted to say that, and Jorge will mention this in the business meeting right after the reports at 4:30. But the next step is to send the reports, all the committees to send the reports to the liaison, which is me, and I will send them to Tammy Omholtz, and they will be posted along with the agenda, on the website for this conference. So we'd like to have the committee reports by August 31st. Okay, so thanks again, Mark, and let's go then to Kevin Godsey and John Hammerly, who will give a committee report for the new technology.
Kevin, we can see your screen, but we can't hear you. Did you call in on another number? Nope, I can hear you.
I mean,
you're good.
So you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yesterday, the technology committee had technology problems and an emergency. Steve Roker stepped in and saved the day and took a lot of notes, and we finally got something put together. What we did was we kind of reviewed the national report from last year, the North Central report from 2 years ago, moved some of those forward, and then came up with some new ideas and some of the things that I'll be going over. First, we need to get some standards created for some of the new stuff coming up. So projection for raster data set, and I think Alex Dom is working on that. We need to develop a process for tracking spatial edits to Sergo, and I think Adolfo may be working on that. Develop data models for transferring data from other sources, MFA or the Soil Mechanics Lab, other laboratories that are collecting really good data. We need to get it somehow either integrated, linked, or put into our own database. And then we need to develop some methods for incorporating the new data, the MIR, the XRF, and any other tricorder data that we come up with. In the data section, we've got to digitizing the old soil data. Some of it is still in spreadsheets. In Missouri, Mark Avney has been collecting KSAT data, hundreds of sites of KSAT data, and it's sitting in a spreadsheet somewhere because we don't have a place to put it. agencies, universities are collecting dynamic soil properties. Mark kind of went over that. We need a way to digitize and capture this data into our databases. We need to incorporate ARS. It's our sister agency, and we don't have access to their data electronically or databases. The Soil Mechanics Lab has thousands and thousands of records of data on soils that we don't have access to. And then university cooperatives like the Shack, the last time we did an upload for the Missouri data was 12 years ago. Since then, they've still been sampling, and we haven't gotten any of that data incorporated. Some of the other things that were kind of coming up is there's a new handheld DNA sequencer, and they're actually using that on soils. It's not all that expensive. The price is coming down. It's pretty crazy that you can have a handheld DNA sequencer. They're talking about trying to get the MIR into a handheld scanner. We are purchasing more XRF scanners. I think those are running $16,000 a piece. And we don't know what kind of tricorder we'll have sometime in the future. There's a push to develop papers describing the merits of Sergo, Statco, Global Soil Map, the Soil Grid. Suzanne, Sky, Dylan, and Zamir are working on that. We need to regenerate the U.S. Global Soil Map. The DSM focus team is working on that. And I think we need to start using the ECM, which is the Electronic Content Manager. When I bring this up, or management, when I bring this up, people, they don't know what it is. And I think one of the reasons that the government has not gone total electronic and gone away from paper is because there's no place to put all this electronic data. And I believe they've put millions of dollars into this program, and maybe we can start using it. For training, ARC Pro doesn't seem like it's high technology, but not that many people are using it. And we are shifting over to ARC Pro from ArcMap. And I think this is a high priority to get people trained and switched over. Google Earth Engine, there is a lot of information that can be downloaded through that engine from the satellite data, and people need some training on that. We need to incorporate the DSM, the statistics into basic soil surveys. Right now, they're separate, and we need to put them all together. We need more new NASAS training. We haven't had a NASAS training in a long time, and it was suggested that this committee figures that we need to do that again soon. The ECM training, I can't remember what his name is, but he's put together quite a few videos and a manual on how to use it, and then soil water balance modeling, as we saw in Dylan's presentation yesterday. In the software section, we need to build some R functions to make the GNASCO more accessible, and Stephen Roker is kind of taking a step in that direction. We need to build R functions to classify soils. Andrew Brown is starting to push into that direction. There's a committee now that is formed, and it has started. It's been funded, and it's a 3-year, if I remember right, it's a 3-year project to assess the needs for a new NASAS modernization. And in this case, NASAS is not just the database NASAS, but the whole system of NASAS. Web soil surveys, staging server, the NASAS database, the KSSL database, and all the other databases, and getting them either to coordinate, interact, or combined into a cohesive system that is easy to use and makes it available for people. We need to do more efficient coordination among the servers. Kind of as mentioned, if the KSSL database stays separate and the NASA's database stays separate, we need to try to work on efficiency coordinating them. As stated earlier by Mark, they're coordinating the edit database system with the NASA's database system, and then they're going to coordinate the edit system with the web soil survey system. So that is in the works. We need to capture the information, rules, and tasks for DSM models. Tasks is new in ARC Pro. You can create a task which automatically runs through a whole bunch of series of steps. It's kind of like the model, but it's a step above that says, do this model, then do this process, do that process. And when you start automating your systems in a DSM and you get a really good model, you could just send the model and the tasks to somebody else, and then they could run that themselves. They wouldn't have to recreate and rebuild that model over again. Another section was in the outreach. There's quite a bit of social media engagement with the soils. There is a new version of Soil Explorer that's now available. It came out a couple of weeks ago. It's on the Google Play and the iPhone App Store. We need to get more CONUS layers, and I believe the DSM group is working on that. I also think that they also have filled, or they at least put out the position that is in West Virginia, that hopefully they'll pick that up again. The soil color maps, I think, were a hit. They are pretty. And maybe we'd think of doing some more ways with that. And then links to Wikipedia. Wikipedia in the taxonomy section, it's not being kept up with taxonomy, but taxonomy's changing constantly. So it's kind of hard to get in there and keep it up to date, but just soils information on Wikipedia that people could access and use. Want to be able to try to incorporate the Alaska and the Hawaiian Islands and the Puerto Rico into our database. Another idea was to bring old map units online, scan them, georeference them. Many are incomplete, but it'd be kind of neat to see old in new technology. The online education for the loves of soils. There's another thing for social media that's out there. Derivatives for the Sergo taxonomic units for the Ag Handbook 296. And then an interactive taxonomic key, which Andrew Brown is working on. So there's some new tools coming out. There's old tools that are needing to be revamped into the newer systems. Perfect example, ArcMap is 32-bit, Arc Pro is 64-bit. It's a big jump. You can work on a lot larger areas with smaller raster values. I had ArcMap crash in 15 minutes. I did the exact same process in ArcMap and it completed in 5. Big difference there. When we get NASA's maybe into the SQL Server on a 64-bit, it won't be so draggy, and hopefully they'll get all the fields added in before George Teachman leaves. So that's the recommendations from the technology group.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. That's a lot of positive activity taking place. So Any questions for Kevin?
So this is Dave, and I'll just kind of repeat my comments from last time, and then I promise I won't say it to every group on here, Curtis. But if you want something done, if these committees are doing something done, and you want it done by a certain time, or want a specific deliverable for somebody to work on, and you want something passed on to the national committees down in Alabama next year, there's got to be a little bit more to these than just a list of cool things. So when you provide this information to Curtis, you need to flesh it out, I think, a little bit more and say, so what about bring old maps online? What old maps, bring online where, so that somebody can take this and say, we can make an assignment to somebody on this then, and we can make sure to get something like this done. But otherwise, it's just a cool thing talked about by smart people at a meeting in Missouri.
Yeah, Dave, that's a good point. And having been involved with these committees, both from within the NRCS and as a cooperator outside of the NRCS, it's been my experience that if anything's going to happen, you've got to have somebody make it happen. Somebody has to own it and make it happen. There's a lot of really cool stuff, but the question is, what are we actually going to carry across the finish line? So, like Dave said, if you can prioritize and think about how these committees could actually achieve these goals and incorporate that into the reports, that's what we need. Okay, thanks again, Kevin. Now we'll move to soil taxonomy, speaking of making things happen. And we've got Matt Bromley and John Warner that have done a really good job chairing the North Central. I've been sitting in on it most meetings, but they've carried it forward. And I'll let, John, are you going to give this report?
Yes, I'm giving the report.
Okay, take off.
Well, thanks everybody. First of all, I want to thank Matt Bromley, the co-chair, and Curtis was kind of our scoutmaster. So I appreciate their help in this in Denver. We had a great group of folks in the program, in the committee, and you can see them at the top there. I won't go through their names. You'll be able to see it on the report. And then the people that called in, we broke it out by state for the region. So we had a good broad spread of everybody. So we had several charges to go through. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to go through fairly quickly. Our notes will be attached to this and you can read them on the website when they're up. But one of the charges that we were told was make a decision. Yes, no, or this thing needs work, get it out of here. So that's what we did. The limnic subgroup to the Histels proposal was a very well thought out proposal. It looked really good. It will affect maybe small portions of our region, but we think it should move forward. The fluvenic and packic subgroups for gel-alls proposal, again, it was done very well thought out, and we think this needs to move on to the National Committee for a yes/no vote. Now, the tephric epipedon proposal, we're not sure how much of this would be in our region, but we reviewed it and we thought that maybe it needs some more work. It definitely maybe shouldn't be an epipedon, but could be lower in taxonomy. We do recognize that it is important to the eco sites of Southwest United States. Very important in the Western region, we understand that. But again, when we do taxonomy, we want it to be made simpler, and we also want it to have a good purpose. We don't want to add things just to add them. Artifact soils, Artisol's order proposal. This was very well done, and John Galbraith did a great job. We had several of the people proposing these present to us, and John did a great job. The committee approves this proposal with one recommendation. Consider moving the soil temperature and moisture regimes up in the taxa. Right now they're not in there. So John was very appreciative of our comments, and we'll take that to his group. But again, I think this is something that should be moved forward with the National Committee. Simplifying the MOLEC. Now this is very important to our region. We've got a little bit of mollisols in the area, and I'm all for simplifying them, but it doesn't at some point seem like they're doing that. But so our recommendation was maintain the sliding scale, and then also address the umbric epipedon simultaneously. Now, there were some things about making maybe a solid depth of 20 centimeters, and we realize that causes some issues with some areas. I don't think we're going to get away from having issues in different parts of the country, even the region, but something's going to have to happen, and there will be a workload. And we do want to think about the workload. People always say, don't think about the workload involved in taxonomy. And like I've said before this week, those are the folks that don't have to do it. So we agree that this needs to be moved forward, and maybe some revision on the sliding scale and the thickness. The tenumolic. Basically what we thought about the tenumolic was we need to simplify the molic, get it taken care of, and then work on the tenumolic. Because if certain parts of the molic are changed, there will be no need for the tenumolic. Densing working group proposal. Basically, the group has rejected any change on the Densic. Keep the CD for mostly the glaciated areas, and use CR where there's geologic material. If there's something that needs to be dealt with the restrictions, deal with that in NRCS.
John,
and we do, yes.
may I break in for 1 second? It's really kind of hard to see your document. Could you go up to your View tab?
Okay.
And click that?
Yes. Yes.
And then down
Okay.
just right below you, hit Page Width. Just go more to the right, right there. Click that.
Okay.
Thank you
How's
so
that?
much.
Okay, I apologize. Looks great here. Okay. The Densic, we're not, we want to stop this. We don't think that it should be moved on anymore. And there were some thoughts about the CDR horizon, completely dumb and ridiculous. No. Next topic, thaptohistic. The committee approves this proposal with the following recommendations. Clarify how this will affect udifluvents. So I think it's, again, a pretty good proposal, but there just needs to be a little bit of work done on the udifluvents, and then we can move on. The next three are all to deal with the organic materials, tier criteria and control section depth for organic soils. We feel that this proposal should be moved forward. It was done very well. Reaction class for the family differentiator of organic soils. The committee again approves this proposal. We need to include some pH with some classification in the field. Change in the proposal, there's some discussion on vegetation. And, you know, we don't do that in soils. We know it's very important, but we haven't used that in taxonomy. So we think that should be moved to a footnote. And stipulate the vegetation is in native undisturbed state. And then the next one was definitions and criteria of soil organic material. And this is a very interesting one. It talks about using the von Post method. And we feel that that should be moved forward on and approved. So we want to move these on with the exception of the DENSIC. Dan Wing did tell me to say that some of this is still work in progress. He's actually doing some work with the University of Minnesota, the Forest Service and such in Minnesota on the reaction classes and the Von Post and the definitions. So there's still going to be some work to be done, but we feel that these are in the right direction and should be looked at. Again, I want to thank everybody on the committee, especially Matt Bromley. He did a great job. That's all I have to say.
All right, John. Questions for John? Okay. I've been on taxonomy committees many times, and the ones this year, 2020, have really been good. And this is a good example, in my opinion. Thank you, John, and thank you, Matt. Okay, next on the list, we have research needs. That's Sky Wills and Jason Ackerson.
Hey, Curtis and everybody. This is Jason. I'm trying to share my screen here. Great. Can y'all see my screen there? It should say discussion summary.
Yes.
Okay. So we had a pretty lively discussion in the research committee. And as happens when you have some research-minded folks in the room, the conversations were far-reaching. But we tried to pin things down around the sort of central question of what technology or methodology or scientific knowledge is needed to really develop that next generation of soil survey or the dynamic soil survey. We saw some great examples and some great vision from Dave Limbo and Dave Hoover about what that really could look like and what the future of soil survey should be. So we started our discussion really thinking about what sort of research needs do we have in really pushing soil survey in that direction. And so I'm going to share with you a quick summary of some of those discussion points. But before I get too far into that, one of our goals is to make this a sort of living document. So anyone who attended the committee meeting or was unable to attend the meeting in person, Sky and I will share the link to this Google document with everyone. And we'd appreciate comments or suggestions or additions, edits to this document. So one of our sort of tasks at the end of this would be to hopefully get some feedback from other meeting attendees on the sort of direction of some of these research ideas. So with that being said, one of the first things we discussed was trying to think about ways of linking dynamic soil properties in the current studies and interest in dynamic soil properties with the biogeochemical processes that result in those changes in dynamic soil properties. Specifically thinking about ways of linking up with other researchers who work more on the mechanistic or empirical biogeochemical modeling side, and how we can integrate some of those other efforts in biogeochemistry to inform the work we're doing related to dynamic soil property inventory. So thinking about ways we can integrate some of these models into DSP studies. So can we use biogeochemical process-based models to determine the magnitude or direction of changes in dynamic soil properties as we move from one ecological state to another? So can mechanistic empirical biogeochemical models be used to quantitatively describe the state and transition models in ecological site descriptions? And then we started thinking about this same idea from maybe the other direction, instead of what can models do for soil survey, but rather what can soil survey or NCSS capabilities do to inform biogeochemical models. So how can we link integrate the spatial variability of soils, i.e., soil maps and soil survey information, to inform or improve landscape level biogeochemical models, essentially spatialize these models in an informed or soil science informed way. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about working with biogeochemical modelers. How can we improve the representation of soils in these models? Often they lack explicit references to pedologically important soil features such as horizons or soil structures. They may not be represented in the models, which limits their utility for the the first three bullet points here. So how can we work with the biogeochemical modeling community to improve their models in a way that helps the mission of dynamic soil property inventory and survey? And then as we started thinking about some of those questions related to dynamic soil properties and biogeochemical modeling, we shifted our discussion a little bit to, how do we think about scaling soil survey data? So Zamir brought up a really important point about the fact that the basis of our soil survey information system is the point observation or the PEDON. But we sometimes lack the appropriate tools to think about the right way to scale those point observations to particular spatial extents. So what are the right ways and best practices when scaling point observations to hill slopes or catchments? And thinking about things in the other direction, if we're aggregating soil spatial information to larger scale outputs, such as might be used by land surface models with a 5-kilometer grid resolution, what are the best practices from a soil survey perspective in utilizing or upscaling that data? It's not as simple as just taking the average of a grid cell, which is often what happens in land surface models. So how do we again, bridge with another user group community, the modeling world, on improving soil output or soil survey output? And then thinking about the best ways of sampling to inform these scaling methodologies. What's the best distribution of samples to describe the way soils data or soil spatial patterns reoccur across landscapes? And then also thinking about which properties are scale dependent or scale independent, and how do we identify limitations to some of those properties. And again, it was brought up a really good point about, at some scale, soil variation essentially appears chaotic. The hydraulic conductivity measured, sub-meter scales sort of varies almost randomly. Yet if we look at the hill slope scale, we might have some more spatial persistence in those measurements. So can we identify which properties are scalable, which properties are unscalable, and then in which environments those scaling relationships hold true? And then, a lot of this discussion in the previous sections related to how soils information relates to other scientific communities. And then it was brought up, we really don't have a lot of good information on who uses soils information and how they use it. So if we're thinking about the business of soil surveys as providing that value added piece to our clientele, it might be useful to do some maybe less soil science based research, but demographic or sociological research into users of soils data. So thinking about what are the most common uses of soils data, and what scientific or policy user groups are most frequently accessing that data. And when they access that data, how do they access it, and what properties are they interested in? So if we are trying to develop a dynamic soil survey to meet the needs of policy makers, what data is most relevant to that group? And is it the same as the data that's relevant to groups who are interested in hydrologic or land surface modeling? And then lastly, what are the barriers to that soil data access or utilization, and how do we overcome those barriers so that more people have access not only to the data that we're providing and the data that's relevant to them, but in a way that's relevant to them? And can we provide data that's more useful to those user groups, so they're not utilizing maybe potentially inferior or less well-researched data products, that are just simply easier for them to access. Now, I won't name names on what I think those products are. And lastly, we had a conversation about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is targeted or balanced soil sampling approaches. So thinking about ways of optimizing sample allocation within soil survey projects that we could provide the most information gain per sample, and thinking about sampling efficiency in terms of the amount of information learned per pad-on observation, both for digital soil mapping projects, but also dynamic soil property projects. And is there a way we can design sampling schemes that could realize the potential for both those projects? So could we get a dynamic soil property project that also informs a digital soil mapping project within the same sampling area? And that came about a conversation on sampling based on map uncertainty versus soil property variability. Which one is the most viable approach for either map development and map validation versus knowledge gain in terms of learning about how dynamic soil properties change? And then again, we had a discussion on landscape scale sampling and component versus component level sampling, and thinking about the ways that our sampling methodologies could bias or inform the types of knowledge we can gain in terms of some of the previous questions related to scaling and dynamic soil property validation. And then one last section we talked about was alternative strategies for developing or validating DSP projects. And this was really related to the idea of, can we co-locate dynamic soil property projects with existing data resources that might aid in some of that four-dimensional data scaling. So co-locating projects with existing USDA resources like ARS watersheds and scan sites, but as well as reaching across to NSF resources. And then thinking about what the validity of those long-term monitoring sites would be for dynamic soil properties. Are they the most representative of the types of data we're interested in? And then can we potentially add instrumentation to existing facilities to help provide data or knowledge that might inform some of the spatial scaling of these processes? So is there a way we could add a series of sensors to an existing scan site that would make it more representative of the variation of those measurements across a hill slope rather than at a single point or pad-on? And then a really good point was brought up. I can't remember who brought this up, but the potential for using previous observations vis-a-vis RACA points or soil survey pad-ons as sampling units for DSP projects. So if we go back and revisit some RACA sites that are either have undergone land use change or under the same land use, can we measure the changes in those soil carbon stocks and utilize that as part of a DSP project? Essentially, we have the pre-data, and then we could collect data 10 years post previous observation. So that's the bulk of what we've discussed. So for the group, what I'm and Sky and I are both asking folks to do is to come into this Google Doc and add comments from anyone who's interested. And our asks is that you provide some feedback on the proposed ideas, but also rank topics in terms of their importance or what you think is most valid. So the way this document is set up, anyone who has the link can add a comment, and then Sky and I will edit those down to the relevant points. And then we'll refine those ideas and then send those up the chain to the national committee with the target being of 3 priority research items. That's all I have, Curtis.
Thank you for that, Jason. That is a good illustration that there's no shortage of interesting things to do. And prioritizing is really going to be helpful. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're getting a little tight on time. So rather than putting out a call for questions, if you have any questions for Jason or Sky, please contact them directly. So now we'll move to interpretations. And I wanted to say, first of all, Ron Coleman, we apologize for misspelling your name. We got it corrected in the agenda posted on the center site, but on this agenda, it slipped through the cracks. So we're sorry about that. But so Ron, could you give a report on interpretations, please?
All right. Well, this is Patrick, also on the interpretations. He helped build a lot of this stuff, so I told him I'd go ahead and present. So our agenda, we looked over just the web soil survey metrics on what's most queried, those kind of interpretations, what's most looked at. A lot of everything looked at is under 25 acres and a finer resolution than what our product was made for. So how can we move that into the future with some of those in interpretations? Looked at the 2019 community charges, reached out to the other regions, got the Northeast and Southern regional meeting suggestions. So we'll see those as we go. Bob Dobos gave us a bit of a presentation on modernizing NASIS or an interpretation generator that, if it comes to fruition, can actually read off of multiple data sources, either the transactional, public data sources, authoritative information such as climate, terrain, maybe site-specific information or raster. So something that could be coming towards the future. And then came up with some interpretations for the region. We had a fairly small group join us, so we were able to have a little discussion about the interpretations. The two that we thought were probably the most important were just continuing to develop the practice standard suitability interpretations and the resource concern potential interpretations. Those were two that were in the works, but got put on the back table whenever COVID hit with our animal mortality and milk disposal interpretations that Bob had to develop, and others as well. We also were considering, should we develop a reclamation suitability? It seems that Montana has this. BLM, they might be interested in such a rating. Is this something that we want regional, or is it better served at the state level for just the coal mine, oil well reclamation, maybe pipelines, things of that nature, and maybe some type of restoration of land as well along those same lines of interpretations. Others that we could have interpretations that could have the option to run multiple scenarios with comparisons. So you can have maybe a high-low RV. Continue to look at soil health related interpretations. I know these are fairly generalized here. Continue to develop urban interpretations, maybe even for some of those urban watershed planning, additional data inputs for those kind of systems. Documentation or interpretation of what needs to be done to make a soil or a site suitable for land. And then some irrigation productivity indexes, all those other things as well. Other regions had on there allowing user inputs of parameters for more site-specific interpretations, a little more tweaking on that. Making names of interpretations more uniform. There's some that say yield, some that are productivity, some that are a different type of index of that same category, but trying to get those more uniform because they're tough to track down if you're looking on a larger scale. Collecting local and regional yield to compare against the modeled indices to make sure we're refining that properly. Populate miscellaneous areas with data so we can actually have interpretations generate on that rather than having null information. Having some local user input with geology, climate, subaqueous type of things. Maybe we could modify some of those for the specific crops, artifacts for the North States as well. Providing hyperlinks in the interpretations So that way they can just have some additional documents and references on more about it. And I guess just the other part of this is we experienced this year. So how are we going to prepare for the next catastrophic event? How do we be ready, or how do we swarm quickly? Then I just wanted to put that up there of the interpretations focus team that Bob talked about, and the future of what interpretations might be if this generator that can read off of multiple sources of information, that's one of the things that they've been talking about. So that's all I have.
Okay, Patrick, thank you for that. There were some very, I think, important topics that you got there, and looking forward into the future. So really appreciate your report. Okay. And so next we've got Sam Interante in bylaws.
Curtis, Sam has no report for today. They involved yesterday at the committee.
All right. So then we can skip down to hydric soils and wetlands. Kobe, are you there? Or Jennifer Smith? And can you give us a report of where you guys are?
Yep, I'm here. Let me get my presentation up.
Okay.
All right, so I'll get us back on time here. We got a quick report. So the North Central Hydric Soils Committee is new. So this is the first time we've met. Most of the other regions have a Hydric Soils Committee, and most of them are pretty active. But we didn't have one in the mountain region, and we didn't have one in the North Central region. So so these committees mainly work hand in hand with the National Technical Committee for Hydric Soils, so that we can relay any problems that we have related to hydric soils and the hydric soil field indicators back to that committee. So because this is the first time we've met, I wanted to actually develop a committee charge. And I basically ripped off the committee charge that the Northeast Hydric Soils Committee has, and I just changed the name. So I proposed this to the group, and there was no opposition. But Hydric Soils Committee maintains a formal mechanism within the North Central region to identify, document, prioritize, communicate, and address the critical research and development issues related to hydric soils. And it sounds like everyone was okay with that committee charge. So we are going to basically run with that. But again, the main mission is to take information from this region and relay it to the National Technical Committee for Hydric Soils, and also serve as a way for that committee, the National Technical Committee, to make asks or to try to get just feedback from people at the local level. So some of the things we talked about in this meeting, one was an update from the National Technical Committee, and we had a virtual meeting back in April. And in this virtual meeting, there was mainly two main topics. One was the technical standard that is used to basically develop data for proposed changes to the field indicators for hydric soils. That technical standard was submitted for peer review, and so you can read the full technical standard right now. It's Hydric Soils Technical Note 11. So you can Google that if you want, or just search Hydric Soils Technical Committee, and that is basically the guidelines for how data can be collected and then submitted to the committee in order to make a change to the hydric soil field indicators. The other main topic that was covered is the red parent material, F21, which is a test indicator, and the National Technical Committee is looking for comments from people in affected areas. And this is from the field indicator guidebook. I can go back to this in a second. But this is a map showing where red parent materials occur. And the issue is when you have red parent materials, despite being high chroma with lots of red in there, these soils, even though they can experience reducing conditions for extended periods of time, like in a wetland, they don't actually create chroma 2 or less chromas. They stay high chroma. And so it's hard to actually determine if you have a wetland present. And so for the North Central, we have 2 areas that where these parent materials occur. So South Central Kansas, as well as Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So we are looking for comment. So if any of you have descriptions of relevant pedons where this might actually have an implication for how a wetland might be mapped, or if you have any potential monitoring sites where we could test this further, we would love to hear more about it. And then as a committee, we also explored kind of what topics need to be addressed within our region. So there wasn't a whole lot of ideas that were communicated during the meeting, but the 2 main ones were developing or fine-tuning indicators for mollisols in the region. It's notoriously difficult to find indicators when our soils are naturally so dark. So we might need some more work on that front in our region. And also, there are no indicators meant for Nebraska and rainwater basins. So these are 2 issues that should need further attention. And the plan is, as we get this committee formed, have more communication within the region so that we can kind of better address issues like these. So if you would either want to comment on the F21 indicator, or if you'd like to join the North Central Hydric Soils Committee, please send me an email. My email's on the screen here, morberg@ksu.edu. And I'll add you to some sort of email list that I've yet to form, and we will be in touch. And that's the end of my report.
Well, thank you very much, Kobe. I think the North Central Hydric Soils Committee is needed, and looks like there's lots of room to grow. So thank you for that. Okay, the last report is the standards report, and that was scheduled to be given by Chad Ferguson, but his daughter is having a medical procedure, so he couldn't send it. So he couldn't give it, so he sent it to me. So what I'm going to do is give a real quick overview of what he sent. Let's see. All right. So I'm sharing the screen now, and he only had 4 slides. So the recent activities, there's quite a bit going on in part 618 of the National Soil Survey Handbook. The representative value now has been defined in such a way that it approximates the 50 percentile, the median. And then clarification of fragment sizes. So, okay, we've got very coarse sand. That's 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters. But what if it is exactly 1 millimeter? Is it coarse sand or very coarse sand? And if you're a computer, that makes a big difference. So now there are the less than or equal to get rid of that ambiguity. Von Post humidification scale, Dan Wings talked about that quite a bit in the taxonomy committee, but basically that's been around for a long time, and it's a very simple test to get at how decomposed organic material is on a scale of 1 to 10, and there's a YouTube video on that. So if you just Google Von Post humidification, how to do it, that should come up. A new textural modifier has been added, Shelley. So whenever, there are a lot of coarse fragments composed of shells. And a little bit of rewording of the prime farmland as it related to small farms and urban settings. And the objective there was to get the National Soil Survey Handbook in compliance or the same language as the Code of Federal Regulations. And also there were some updates with respect to links that were now outdated, and also the responsibilities of who did what. Current activities, boat safety, that's out for review right now with all of these committees, and we mentioned that earlier with Greg Taylor's talk. And if you're interested and want to make comments, just go to that link. Another current activity is the Northeast Regional Conference made changes to their bylaws and passed it by vote. So that one is on its way to e-directives. And the last couple of things have to do with GIS, and I think Kevin Godsey mentioned this earlier, but there's a shift to ArcGIS Pros and to Pro, and Chad made the point that the GIS community at large is transitioning to ArcGIS Pro, and that we, are as well, and that the staff needs to be trained ASAP. And so these are two courses in which the ArcGIS Pro will be basically taught. And then the last thing had to do with database focus team in conjunction with the senior regional soil scientist, and it deals with minimum data set standards for tabular data posted on web soil survey. And there are three aspects of it right there: to reassess existing data, establish standards for new data, and develop data integrity reports. So that's passing it on to you secondhand. If you need more information or detailed information, contact Chad Ferguson directly, if you would. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to get back to the agenda because we're running just a bit behind.
Curtis?
Yes.
Just a quick question, because I'll forget to write to Chad, but where is the Shelley texture modifier used? Is that a coastal thing?
Yeah, that is a coastal thing. So when you go to the beach and pick up shells, that's the environment where it will be used.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh. Okay, then we'd like to move into the business meeting and the wrap up. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jorge, if you would. Jorge, please proceed with the business meeting.
Hi, Curtis, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
All right. So we have 4 agenda items for the business meeting before we adjourn for today. The first item that we have on the agenda items is host for the next North Central Conference. In 2016 was hosted by Ron Coleman in Illinois. Last in 2018 was by Nathan Jones in South Dakota, this year here. And the next one will be in Michigan. And I don't know if Martin Rosek is joining us, but I visited with him earlier today, and he's willing to accept the conference. And he would like to host it in 2022 with the land-grant institution there. The second item that I have is the committee reports will be archived, like Curtis announced earlier, at the National Soil Survey Conference website. Chairs should send reports to the conference liaison. In this case will be Curtis at curtis.monger@usda.gov by COV on August 31st. Any questions? So I kept going. And the third action item that I have is, agenda item is that has been proposed that to maintain the same committees for the 2022 conference. And those should be soil ecosystem dynamics, new technology, taxonomy, research needs, interpretations, bylaws, hydric source and wetlands, and standards. And the fourth agenda item, questions before we adjourn. So I would like to know if Patty Quackenbush, PQ, is there so we can adjourn for today.
Does PQ want to say anything, Jorge? Because
oh, she's there. Okay, PQ.
Yes, and PQ, you were a key player. Without a university contact like you, we couldn't have pulled this off. So do you have any thoughts?
I was thinking about this earlier today when I was running out to pick up groceries. I had ordered online. I'm one of those people. And when we all started talking about this, I hadn't delivered my child yet. So this year, my kid's life and doing this conference, it's almost like having a second child. I have learned way more, I think, about event planning and conference and everything that I don't think I ever wanted to know, but I am glad that I know it now. And I am so grateful that I had the help of so many people like Jorge and Curtis and Mark Abney, John Cabrick, Sammy Durante, Jen Hartwick, and the amazing people over at the conference office to help with planning and doing a lot of the legwork. And it's been really fun. And I definitely learned a lot more about soils than I think I ever knew I could learn. I'm a top-down soil scientist. I came in through plants. I'm not a geology upward person, so I'm kind of the oddball in soils anyway. But no, I am so grateful, and I'm very grateful to everyone that agreed to be a presenter, either in person, through Zoom, or by sending their conference talk ahead of time. I've never been in a virtual conference before. I was listening on the calls with all the other regions when we had the big conference calls, and I have to say this went incredibly well. I don't think I could have envisioned it going, better than it did. Everybody was great. Everybody was patient with each other, and I'm so grateful for everybody's involvement in this. And sad that we all couldn't hang out at the University of Missouri. There's some great places to hang out, especially after, post-conference proceedings. There's some good places around campus, but sometime we'll all get together again in person, and I'd be happy to give you a tour of Mizzou. So, but yeah, no, thank you everyone for being awesome and for making this happen. I do appreciate that.
Well,
thank you, PQ.
Yes, again, thank you, PQ. So with that, I think that we're adjourned until tomorrow. We meet back to hear about field trip, and all the links have been sent out for the field trip.
Curtis, if I could jump in here really quick.
Yes.
We did post the links, the YouTube links on the agenda page. We are also emailing out an updated agenda that's linked. The Zoom links for tomorrow have changed on the original agenda, and we hope that we've made that clear within the email that went out to all registered attendees. So following the link on the agenda that we sent today with the YouTube links, those Zoom links will match the discussion. We are also uploading a list of attendees and their associations on the website. That should be done here shortly. It'll be located on the summary and homepage. We did have 200 people register for the conference as of this afternoon.
Wow. That's great. Okay, Thank you, Jen. And anything else from any of the organizers?
I would like to thank everybody. Like I said, when we began, John K., Rick, Mark, Tamin Durante, yourself, PQ, everybody. Thank you for everybody for the help and playing together to make this happen. You know all the challenges that we had on this, so have been a long journey.
It was on video. Bye.
But have been a very successful conference, I think. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Jorge, and see everybody tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
You will be here. Okay.